Welcome to The Strain Podcast, a Southgate Media Group production, where we talk all about Guillermo del Toro's new heart-wrenching horror fantasy series, The Strain, that airs on Sunday nights on FX. I'm your host, Blair Knight Graves, associate editor from showratings.tv, and with me today is Kyle Tremblay, the editor-in-chief at showratings.tv. You can find us on Twitter at BlairLovesTV and at KyleLovesTV. Remember, Blair and Kyle both have an E at the end. And you can follow this podcast's Twitter handle at TheStrainPod. Hi, Kyle. How you doing today?
Oh, Blair. Well, I feel like we had been getting a little too chummy on this podcast these last few weeks, where we both agreed that some episodes, or basically that one episode was very good, and then we kind of agreed that a few episodes were pretty bad, and then the last few we both agreed were good. And we kind of got away from our initial premise of the podcast, which is that you know about this world and I don't. And I feel like this week is going to be a return to the to our original dynamic, where I think we're gonna have differing opinions on this episode.
Well, I'm very interested to hear all about our differing opinions.
Yeah.
Well, just for our audience, today we will be discussing Season 1, Episode 12, which was called Last Rites. It was written by Carlton Cuse, David Weddle, and Bradley Thompson. Just so that everybody knows about these writers a little bit, Carlton Cuse is most famous for his writing on Lost, for which he won many accolades. And he also played an influential creative role in Lethal Weapon 2, Lethal Weapon 3, Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade, and San Andreas.
Wow.
David Weddle and Bradley Thompson co-wrote Season 1, Episode 7 of The Strain for Services Rendered, which is the episode in which Satrakian and Eichhorst have their very powerful background episode, and Season 1, Episode 2, The Box. Carlton Cuse will also be one of the co-writers of next week's season finale, The Master, which he will be co-writing with Chuck Hogan.
Well, and he is the showrunner, right? Carlton Cuse is the guy I know Guillermo del Toro and Chuck Hogan are sort of overseeing everything, but the actual show running responsibilities every day, my understanding is that Carlton Cuse is that person.
Yes, that's also my understanding as well.
So yeah, it's the classic showrunner steps in at the end of the season to write the big episodes.
Right, exactly.
Deal.
And I wanted to also say, I did a quick poll over our Twitter feed on @TheStrainPod really quickly, just to go ahead and get us fighting right off the bat.
Yeah, let's do it.
And I just asked everybody while they were watching The Strain who their favorite character was. And we got about 45 people who responded.
Oh.
It was quite a few.
Wow.
And in order, the internet loves the following characters: Fett.
Sure.
Gus.
Oh.
And then Abe.
That makes sense.
And then I thought it would make you happy that there were at least 3 people who jokingly said that Nora's mother was their favorite character.
Okay.
So all props to them.
I like those people. You got jokes. You know what? You got jokes.
But I thought it was very interesting because I know that you and I have very differing opinions on the character of Gus.
We agree on Fett. First of all,
we do.
We agree at the top.
We do.
He is the best character on the show, so we're good at the top. We have very different opinions on Gus, very different opinions on Gus, and very different opinions on this episode. Which I feel like I should just say it rather than hinting at it. I did not like this episode.
Yeah, I got that from reading your review on our website, showratings.tv.
Yeah, and which listeners, you should read my review too, even if you violently disagree with me and want to turn off the podcast right now. Blair will be your champion, so don't. This is the Mountain versus the Viper situation.
I'm the Mountain. I'm the Mountain.
Even though I'm 3 times your size, I suspect that is the case, and you will end up crushing my skull. Spoiler alert for Game of Thrones! Darn it. I've yelled about you with no spoilers 10 times this podcast season, and now I just spoiled Game of Thrones.
Well, you know what? It's been about 6 months since that happened on Game of Thrones, so they've had plenty of time to catch up.
It happened in the books long before that too. You know what? If you're not caught up on Game of Thrones, then screw you. Take it. Suck it.
Wow.
I'm ready for combat today. I'm twirling my swords. Because I watched this episode a second time while I was writing my review, because everyone seemed to love it. And my first reaction was I didn't like it at all. But then I was watching on a really bad back feed. And so I thought maybe that was just because I missed like a third of the dialogue, so I watched it again. And nope, still didn't like it. So
Well, and
here we
for
go.
the record, you do watch the series legally. Let's say that.
Yeah, no, yeah, I watch it through my cable company. So,
Yes.
so I mean, it's totally above the board. But yeah, it was I understand why people like this episode. I should say that up front. Um,
Okay. Well,
I get it. This is not a case where I don't understand why people liked it. It's a case that I disagree with the reasons that people liked it. Although I want to hear your reasons because maybe I'm characterizing that wrong.
I think, per usual, we should probably just go plot by plot and talk about
Sure.
it. I mean, I think I will give sort of an overall opinion of I thought, but then again, as you said in your little monologue earlier,
Yeah.
I filled in a lot of information from having read the books. Also, classic disclaimer: the biggest difference between Kyle and I is that I've read the books and he is not. There's no other difference between the two of us at all.
Identical.
But
We're
identical
both
people.
a mountain. Other than that,
Exactly. So I felt totally fulfilled by this week's episode. I felt like a lot of important character development occurred. I thought that a lot of, including character development that is just the development of a buffoon, such as F continuing to be useless.
yep.
But like him continuing to try to be the face of the face and savior of this epidemic when he clearly is not in any way, shape, or form equipped to do that. Which
Yeah.
I love that about his character, that he's just a buffoon who's sort of like very, very intelligent, but very, very bad people skills.
Yeah.
Um,
You're not gonna believe this, but I don't love that. But
um,
yeah.
yeah, and I really liked the background, finally seeing the part with Satrakian and Miriam and
Mhm.
how he acquired her heart, and I liked everything that had to do with Gus because I always love everything that has to do with Gus. I'll agree with everything you wrote in your review about Dutch just magically reappearing
Yeah. Well, I
with
mean,
brand new.
we've got to get into the episode because I don't
Yeah,
think people have read my review. They're probably just listening to the podcast.
that's true. I apologize, everybody.
No,
Okay, so
that's okay.
we can get. But I'm just saying, in general, I liked it, but I agree with you about the Dutch thing.
Yeah. No, as usual, I think we probably on everything except Gus, probably more or less see eye to eye. It's just how we're weighting the different factors.
Yeah,
Uh,
that's true.
so I'm also curious. You said you were fulfilled by this episode. Is that fulfilled in relation to you were expecting what would happen based on your knowledge of the books, and you felt fulfilled in the way that the book material was handled, or something else?
Um, I think that it was supplementary to the knowledge that I have from the books, and that's why I felt
Okay.
fulfilled. So it was supplementary knowledge. Is that
Without saying what actually happened in the books, was any aspect of this episode, other than Dutch Velder's presence, a notable departure from what happened in the books?
yes, with the Vampire Squad.
Okay. Oh yeah, right. Because they're not introduced yet in the book.
They're not in the
We know.
first book.
Yeah,
They're
that's
just
what.
flat out not in the first book.
Got it.
So that's a huge departure.
Sure.
Is bringing them in for the. They show up again. Please correct me if I'm incorrect, fellow listeners who have read the books, but they don't show up till near the end of the second book.
Yeah.
So that's a big pushback
Sure.
or a big early arrival.
Yeah.
So I'm not totally 100% on board with them in general.
Sure.
But other than that, like the books, I think we got a little bit more about Miriam and Satrakian. It's sort of nice to see it visually, even though the aging makeup was a little weird.
Oh, we're gonna talk about that. Believe you me, we are going to talk about the appearance of young Abe.
Or middle-aged Abe, I don't know.
Yeah.
So yeah, that was something that I liked. I thought that was very good supplementary material. And then everything that occurred with Nora and her mother was much more impactful in the books. So even though the Mrs. Martinez in the TV show is like awful and just dry heavingly awful.
Yeah.
It's very powerful when Nora is faced with her in the books, and it's very powerful. It's a powerful moment for Nora as a character, and I did think that the actress whose name is slipping my mind at the moment actually did pretty well with that material. Although, albeit she kind of took her time when there were a bunch of vampires, like following them.
Yes. Well,
So,
that is a feature of the show now, which is,
yes,
and we had that like 4 times in this episode, which is a dire situation is occurring. In this case, vampires are breaking down the door to come eat the inhabitants of this room.
yes,
And Nora, whose mother just died, a tragedy, a genuine tragedy, even though that character was not portrayed in a sympathetic way. It's still her mother. She's still dead. You could totally understand it. But maybe in this circumstance, it would be better for her to get moving a little bit because she's about to be eaten by vampires the way her mother just was.
yes,
Um, but having said that, I thought this was Nora's best episode because
yes.
she did end up doing what needed to be done, as the show clearly posited what needed to be done, and Nora finally did it. And I think and I think the way that tied in, as I wrote in my review, the way that tied in to the culmination of Abe's flashback story, and the way that we learned about Abe, that Abe, the sort of seemingly flawless vampire hunter who's only slowed by his old age and bad heart, um, had, last week we learned that he has this sort of revenge anger issue, and this week we learned that he himself has been harboring emotional attachment all these years and hasn't been able to let go. And I think that seeing that through the prism of Nora's own literal severing of her emotional attachment to her mother, and Abe coming to that realization because of that, was maybe the best episode specific storytelling point that the strain has done. That was
I
a very elegant piece of storytelling that was completely out of place in this episode, as I will get into in a bit. But
So I will 100% agree with you that that is probably the most elegant bit of storytelling that this series has ever done. I'm 100% on board with that. Um, I, I enjoy. I think as I spoke about it being supplementary earlier. I think that another way to describe that also though is that in the book, Abe. I don't recall Abe and Nora bonding over that, or that either of their stories kind of reflecting the other.
yeah,
And so I really enjoyed that they were able to connect those characters as I had not seen them connected before.
and it wasn't, the key here is that it wasn't done through monologues, which
Right.
again we're going to get into, but it wasn't that Nora gave a speech about letting go from her mother and then Abe turned around and gave a speech about needing to let go himself. It's that we saw Nora sever the head of her soon to be vampire mother, and we had seen these flashbacks with Abe, and finally saw his relationship with his wife, albeit very briefly, um, and saw how he lost her, and saw, and sort of at least had a understanding of why he kept her heart around all these years, as hideous as it was. And then he didn't say a word to Nora. He took her example and realized in his own life that he needed to do the same thing. And that's what was so powerful, because the series was finally showing and not telling. It was
Yes.
finally a situation where we didn't have to rely on exposition, where those two stories in this episode got to the same point at the same time, and they were able to tie the knot. Between two stories that were meant to parallel each other. And I feel like in almost every episode of The Strain, they intend to parallel two stories, but there's always something that derails it, and they like end at different times, or one of them's really clumsy or not believable, and it just sort of all goes haywire. And in this episode, they stuck the landing. They pulled it off with those two stories.
Absolutely.
And so that was what I really liked about this episode, and what I would consider to be the saving grace of this episode.
Well, I'm glad that we mutually agree on that plot point.
Yes. So we can put those two aside. Although I want to talk about that makeup, but we can put those two aside and and disagree on the rest of what happened.
Okay, well, where would you like to start with the return of Dutch Velders? Because
Let's
I
start
think
with the
we're
return.
gonna,
Yeah.
I think we're
Let's.
gonna agree on
Okay, we're getting
that.
our agreement. We're really just going to disagree on Gus, to be
Yeah.
honest. But we have to talk about Dutch Velders because holy cow,
She showed up with a brand new what are they called in your hair?
scrunchy.
No, 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 no.
Oh,
I was so clever on Twitter, and now I'm being a complete buffoon on our podcast.
like F.
Uh,
You're,
yes,
you're
exactly.
choking like F in front of a
I
camera. Like
am.
it's the
I
end of the
am.
world.
Streaks. She showed up with fresh streaks
Oh
in her.
yeah, I didn't even notice, but that's
Yeah,
great.
she showed up with like her
So,
hair had just been freshly dyed.
so the last we saw our good friend Dutch, she was storming out of the pawn shop bunker because
The only safe place that they
only
know
safe
of in New York.
space. Even though she knows there are killer vampires on the loose, because F insulted her. So she bailed for a few nights and then shows up again right at the doorstep here, unharmed except for the hair,
Yes.
and shows up also with the ability to control all media. And in keeping with Dutch Velder's fashion, uh, really pretty much unexplained. We're just going with it.
Yep. Yep.
she could she could just take over all forms of media for like 20 seconds.
Yep.
Totally fine. D-
Yep. 40 seconds. It was for 40
40
seconds.
seconds. Okay, well, yeah, not
Which is interesting. It's like that is the exact number.
yeah. I mean, listen, we know so little about what she's doing that we can't even get into how ludicrous this is. Like,
That's true.
it's not even explained to the point where it can be ludicrous because
Right.
it's just put out there. It's like the equivalent of this story of this Dutch Velder of what happened with Dutch Velders in this episode would be if Zach was looking out the window at the world and a unicorn walked by and it was never brought up in any other story, and it played no role in this world. It was just like a unicorn walked by. It's like, oh well, that's part of this world. It's like, well, this is a world that includes Dutch Velders in like one night outside on her own, being able to acquire the ability to control all media. Let's move on. It's like that's what we get. I mean, we get it plays out during a 2 minute scene on the roof with Vass, which was like the it's like
Which was nauseating.
it's the worst romantic comedy of the season in
Yeah.
a season where networks debuted like 20 romantic comedies. It's like
It's
terrible.
it's so again though I come at it from the side of being a book reader, and
Yeah,
like it's I don't want to be anti-Dutch just because she doesn't exist in the books,
that's
but I am anti, and you mentioned this in your review. I'm very anti. Let's make the sexiest woman we possibly can and pair her with our big lugging hero.
yes.
And I'm very, very anti that when
Mhm.
Fett is supposed to be a strong, independent hero type character.
Yeah.
And sure enough, he's going to fall for the gorgeous computer hacker who happens to be pansexual or bisexual, however you would put it. What is she? She has passionate. What was her line?
Oh God, I don't. At
Like
some point, at some point, he asks her if she's into girls or guys, and she was like, "I'm." Oh, I can't think of the line,
it's
but
like
yeah,
I love passion. I
yeah,
love I have passionate love affairs or something like
yes.
that. Like
Basically, I will have sex with anything that moves. I mean, I called her pansexual 3 episodes ago. It's the same term that you would use to describe Oberyn Martell, by the way, bringing it back to Game of Thrones. Um, but yeah, I mean that's an accurate description. She
yeah,
will just have sex with anything, and then Vas proceeds to try to basically get it on the roof as they're
yeah.
preparing this broadcast. It's-
Yes, it's ludicrous.
yeah, it's top to bottom ridiculous.
Yes, it,
So-
it it's horrifying. It
but
is
then, oh,
awful.
yeah, I mean, but then I want to talk about the broadcast itself because I don't.
Which
Was it
I liked. I liked the
okay?
broadcast
Well,
itself.
help me understand then, because I'm sure it was in the book, but is it? Are we supposed to think that F did a good or bad job?
We are supposed to think that F is terrible at being the face. Like
Oh,
that this is the thing that this is the truth about Fett is that or not Fett, F. Their names are very close. But
yes.
the truth about F is that he he is a background hero. He's not Fett. He is somebody who works on the sidelines to make everything happen. And continually they make him the face of everything to try to he's made the face by the CDC on purpose so that he can be blamed for it after. Like that's 100% intentional. That's why he went on air because they knew who the scapegoat was going to be. when he goes on air again, he's supposed to be trying to redeem himself, but he fails at it, and he just
Okay.
notifies the authorities of the fact that he is still around.
Yes.
And like, which is again the buffoonery. Like
Okay.
he finds ways to know, and then that causes problems down the line.
Okay. So
So
we are supposed to have taken away that he did a bad job.
yes,
Okay.
that he semi notified everybody, and he got the conspiracy theorists sort of up in arms, but everybody else who still thinks that there's just a really gnarly flu
Yeah. Well,
is not. Yeah.
again, what doesn't work about this, and why this is stupid, is that it brings the entire world back into the
Yeah.
picture,
Yeah.
and the entire world is a huge problem for the strain
Yes.
because we have seen multiple instances, as I've said on like 4 podcasts now, of a senior center being cleared out by vampires, everyone murdered. We've seen vampires in Sears. We've seen them rampaging the crowded streets of Times Square. Um, we know that media exists still because I believe a cooking show was airing when Dutch Velders took over the media. Was
Yes, there
right?
was a cooking
So
show.
normal programming still happening. I'm glad Guy Fieri's still on the network, even though again vampires are rampaging every night in Times Square. Um, so none of this material is going to work
But
because
there,
the world is so stupid. Like
the world is so stupid, but it's only happening in New York, which ties in Gus's story as he is able to aid
wait,
in taking down the vampires that are about to be
wait,
shipped overseas.
yes, it's true. We'll get to that. It's only happening in New York City, which is the de facto capital of the world. So, if something happens in New York City, international media is going to be there. Like New York City events aren't New York City events, they're world events because New York is a rather important city. This is
Yes,
happening in the
yeah,
Midwest in a
yeah,
city that is not Chicago.
right,
This is
right.
happening, this is happening in a city where things get out and
Right.
media covers.
Which goes back to the problem from the episode of The Box, which happens to be written by the people in this who wrote this episode, which is that they immediately open the airports again. Which,
Yeah.
in my mind, if you're trying to bring a worldwide city down, you lock up the airports, you put them in lockdown,
Yeah.
and then you do all the media crashing, which Dutch does, and then you take care of all the transportation in and out of the city. Like that's the way that you get a city. Right now, I'm not. I agree with you. Like I've always agreed with you on the worldwide stuff, but I'm especially upset about like the fact that imports and exports are still able to occur,
Yeah.
and
So
general transport is
right.
able to still like
The world
consumer
is
transportation.
the world is not even close to being in a state of panic, which is hilarious because I think we were saying that that was going to happen in like episode 3. Like
Yeah.
it's shocking that all that we've seen happen has happened and cooking shows are still on TV. That this is
Yes.
not a worldwide story. Again, because it is happening in New York City because the vampires have now been like for like a week now. They've been out every night killing people, turning them. We saw all the people who were sick. Like this is a big deal, and I know the whole media thing is supposed to take care of all of that, but it's so the rules of the media shutdown are so flimsy and so like specific to New York, and we heard local radio stations at various points that are still broadcasting. Like it's just it's garbage. It's hogwash. Like what's happening with the world right now is incomprehensible. Like you could not plot out the arc that the public is having on the strain. And so anything that involves the public is going to be a non-starter. Like any storyline that involves informing the public or telling the public is going to fail by definition because the public has already failed. That story has
Yes.
already failed. So there's no connector. Even if you like F's material in this episode, there's no B. There's an A.
Yeah.
And there's no place to plug that material into because the public is such a just Death Valley of storytelling. Thanks to
Yeah,
how
and
they've handled it.
I don't know that I got a good sense. You said you watched it twice, so maybe you can help me out. I don't think that I got a good sense of who the audience of this broadcast was meant to be.
No,
Like, is it the world? Is it the city? Is it the state? Is it the country? Is it the coast? Is it like who
right.
who got that broadcast?
I
Because
don't
like she
know.
comes in and she's like, I came in with presidential worthy tech, and that's the
Right.
explanation of what she's like. We're gonna broadcast it, but where? Like, you'd think that what makes more sense, even though she brought the internet down, is to do a web stream or, a Ustream or something, and then send it throughout the world.
Yeah.
Is she doing it to a local cable network? Because nobody's watching that
Well,
right now.
given the fact that they were working it out on the roof of the pawn shop, I don't know how it's going to have worldwide reach because the fact that they had to be on the roof seems to indicate that there is a broadcast radius, right? Like
Right.
like you are on the roof because you do not have a digital connection to broadcast to the whole world. So clearly proximity matters here. So I imagine it was local, but the way she was talking about it seemed like it was global. But again, broader point, why does F need to inform people that vampires with killer stingers exist when they are walking on the street every night? Like
Yeah.
we saw with Kelly, like there are just vampires roaming the streets at night openly.
Hmm.
So why does F need to inform the public of their existence when they are not hiding their existence in the slightest?
Well, that goes back to the question of who's the audience of that broadcast, because they're not hiding themselves in New York, but they're not
But no one in
outside
New
of
York
New
knows
York
they
yet.
exist. No one in New York. What evidence do we have that the people of New York acknowledge that vampires exist?
Did Marlowe from The Wire acknowledge it at all?
No. Wasn't he? He was just a patsy, right? He's being used by the vampires to transport goods for in exchange for a bunch of cash, the same way that Gus was being used, right?
Right. Yes.
So he didn't know. I mean, he seemed shocked when the vampires emerged from that container. He had no
But
idea
he
what was going on.
but he had a throwaway line about things are crazy out there or something like that.
Well, everyone has said that at some point, but no one seems to have any idea of what actually is happening except Gus. Like Gus saying that people are being killed on the streets in this episode was the first indication from anyone except, and he is a central character, so he doesn't even really count. But it's our first indication from anyone outside of Abe's gang that anyone has any idea that vampires exist, which is insanity.
Yeah.
I mean, again, they are walking up and down the streets at night. Has no one reported this? Has no one called into a radio station? Does the police not know? Like, are they not patrolling? Like, yeah. I mean, the world right now is in
No,
a mess.
I agree. The absolute weakest part of this series is the way that they handle the entire world. They handle um, their bottle sessions relatively well. I'm going to call them bottle sessions.
Yeah.
Um,
That sounds
when
like
they,
that sounds like what Fett was trying to. No, never mind. I'm not gonna make that joke.
oh my gosh, no, but like I felt like it was not a bottle episode this episode, but
Oh goodness, no.
no, but everything that occurred with the central group, with Abe's group, his ragtag team of would-be vampire killers. I felt like that was very bottle-ish. It felt like a bottle episode without being a bottle episode to me, with them doing everything that they had to in the pawn shop, because it was one thing that they had to get done in one
Hmm.
place, and I felt like I followed it through and through without any confusion, which frequently on this train I do find myself confused.
Well,
Um,
no, I think you're thinking that because for once they didn't break the characters off into pairs. Normally,
mm,
as we talked about, the structure for a strain episode is the characters get broken off into pairs and each pair is given a different story. We've seen this the last few weeks.
okay,
In this episode, they weren't broken off into pairs, but that's not what a bottle episode is. This was very much what I would call a standard episode of the strain,
yeah,
which is that the internet thing was established well in advance. They were addressing that,
right,
and it was resolved 30 minutes into this episode. Like the final third of this episode, that story was resolved. But I mean, yeah, what I think you're saying is that they didn't break the main group up in this episode,
yes,
which is the
yes,
first time that's happened
yes, which I
since the bottle.
enjoyed immensely.
Yeah.
And that's, I think, one of the reasons that I felt that this episode was very strong is I think that group works best as a team, not when you send F and Nora off so that they can like have a fight and then have sex and then have another fight, or to send Dutch and Set off by themselves so that they can like haphazardly sort of try to break into a building
Yes.
and get caught. Like that, like it's not only are the characters unsuccessful, but I feel like the storytelling is unsuccessful in portraying how how poorly they're doing, like because it doesn't give you a reason to root for them when they're separated, but when they're together, I feel like as a unified group, I feel very strongly that I'm rooting for all of them.
I agree with the point that it's better when they're together than when they're separate. We saw that last week when most of them infiltrated the Master's lair and got close. And then of course F runs off and all that. But
Hmm.
what were you rooting for regarding them in this episode? Like, were you really invested in them getting the word out on the broadcast signal? Like, what was there to root for in this episode?
Yeah, I
And then
was.
you were, and then they did then they failed. They failed.
Right.
I
They
mean,
did.
F
They
did a terrible job,
they
and he
failed at
failed.
one thing. They failed
So
at one thing.
so I mean, geez, maybe it's just that I have so little understanding of how the world works. What is that? What does the broadcast signal even do? Like, I don't
It's
understand how it affects anything.
I don't think that I can talk to you about it because I think that it's going to lead into the
Oh, okay.
events next week's episode. Which, by the way, were the events that I thought were going to occur in the third rail, and if they do not occur in the TV show, I will be very upset.
This is the book thing though, because it's like if you, the episode did nothing to establish the importance of that broadcast. Like
Oh,
again, compared to the world, uh, it's unclear how that broadcast is supposed to matter when anyone can look out their window and see vampires on the streets and see people being murdered on the streets, as we
I,
have seen in previous episodes.
yes,
So
but okay. So without this being a spoiler thing, but like just with logic,
yeah.
what did they talk about with F? Were the risks of him going on camera, right? That there are
Oh
risks of him
yeah.
going on
Right.
camera.
I
That he has
might have zoned out during those
So yeah,
scenes.
he's already been made the scapegoat, right?
Well, barely. I mean, in the book, it sounds like it was a lot more, but they use the word scapegoat once, and
Oh
we
my
have. I
gosh.
mean, it's acting like he has been established as the scapegoat is a major stretch at this point.
Yeah, that's
He has
actually
not been established as the scapegoat.
that's an excellent point. In the book series,
Yes.
like they don't spend the entire show in Satrakian's pawn shop, or the entire book in his pawn shop. They spend it like going getting supplies and going on errand. Like they do a little bit of the stuff you hate
Right.
about The Walking Dead, but like they
Yeah.
have missions that they have to complete. They have to acquire certain medicines and like things like that. And like everywhere he goes, he's recognized and people try to like turn him in. So like that's a huge
God.
part of the books.
That sounds like a show I would hate even more than this episode, but okay. I'm sure it's better in the books. So the
Yeah.
books, you can obviously explain things a little better in the books.
Right.
So
So like obviously I don't know what next week lies, but or what lies ahead next week, but
oh,
I would think that him broadcasting his image over whatever
yeah.
broadcast would have a similar effect.
Well, we
That
should also note that the government has not played a role in 9 episodes,
right, which is ludicrous.
right? Like, to me, I am more inclined to believe that the entire story about the scapegoat thing has been dropped. I would not be shocked at all, again, having no knowledge of the books, if that story is not addressed. Uh, based
That
on
made me so sad.
my knowledge, based on just watching TV, and writing about all kinds of different shows, I have no indication at all that the government will play a role in the strain going forward. I think I feel my sense is that that has been dropped. But maybe they're going to bring it back. But it's just like that the scapegoat thing was
Yeah,
downplayed so
that's
much,
yeah. And
and yeah,
that's so ludicrous to me, like just with show knowledge of the fact that he escaped custody and the two people who had him in custody died.
right.
Like the fact that that is like a factor, that is a thing that occurred in his plot line would make me
Yeah.
think that the government would be on the hunt for
Right.
him.
Well, early in this season, we had a scene between the Secretary of Health and Human Services, the woman who runs that,
Homer.
and Palmer, and so we're clearly in a spot where we can have scenes that don't involve our central crew, but do involve people from the government.
Mhm.
Yet we have not had a scene like that since then. We don't know. The government has not played a role on this show since episode 4, maybe 5, episode
Mhm.
4 or 5. Like it has been our central crew as the main characters in the show for half the season now. So to act like the government thing is something that we've been waiting for is would be a betrayal. of how the show has chosen to tell its story. Because the government is not a factor in the show right now, and it hasn't been for a long time. Like, I know book readers are probably expecting it, but if you haven't read the books, the government is out of your mind right now. Like in whatever cover. I mean, so even a close watcher of the TV show, I don't think would say that that F has been made a scapegoat in any way. It's just that is not a factor in the TV show. So again, there's no like for book readers, I understand that there's like a secondary meaning to that scene of him going on television, but I can tell you from a TV show viewer, there just isn't. That is not a factor
Well,
in the story.
I mean, that's something that I did not take into account while I was watching it, honestly. Like, I do go at it, like, and I
But you
try to
can't help
separate
that.
myself. I know.
Yeah.
I try to separate myself as much as I can, but it did not even occur to me that's significant. Like, because you wrote in your review the same thing you just said a couple minutes ago about, like, you can't tell if that was a positive or negative for F.
Yeah.
Like, for me, that is so overwhelmingly like a negative thing for F.
But why then did Dutch Velders throw a little celebration party when they finished it? She's like, "Yay, we did it!" Like, was that sarcastic? Is she just such a bad actor that I couldn't tell?
I think she was just excited that she got it going.
Pulled it off.
She pulled it off.
But
That's what was up with Dutch.
Why wasn't Vast like, "Bro, that sucked"? Like,
Right.
why didn't we have one indication? And then see, my thought was that the show was intending to make it effective because immediately after it went out, Ikerst and company showed up meaning business. And so
Yes.
what I thought is Ikerst was like, "Oh, they got the upper hand on me with this one. I better stop them right now." And so the only conclusion I could draw from that is that it was effective because there was no indication that it wasn't other than F's terrible performance. Um and it seemed to rouse the vampires, or was that just a coincidence?
That is so funny because my read
Uh-huh.
of the episode was, why is Iker showing up now? Is it just convenient for him to show up now?
Okay.
It did not even occur to me that it had anything to do with the broadcast. But
Was
that's dumb for that not to have occurred to me. Like, that is a dumb mistake that I made.
But
But
I don't know. You might be right. It might have not, but I just thought, "Oh, Iker saw the broadcast and he hustled out here to stop it." Like,
Right.
he that freaked him out because suddenly he lost his control over the media for 40 seconds. But
right.
that that reading necessitates the broadcast being effective. And so my takeaway from the episode was that I was leaning towards thinking the show wants us to believe that F was effective, which goes against my instinct, which is that F did a terrible job. And so that's where my confusion is. Is like, I don't, from a plot perspective, it had to be effective in order for Ikers to show up, but from just a my eyes perspective, it was not effective. So
Well, you put together the pieces way better than I did.
okay.
I was very, very lost. But I mean, I was happy to have Icarus back because he's been gone for a little while, and
Me too.
he just does such a good job whenever he's on screen. Doesn't matter what he's doing, he's amazing.
The best.
So that's so interesting because I was going to ask you that, but I mean, obviously you answered it for me. I was going to ask you, why did they show up now? Because it's convenient.
No, yeah, I thought that was all intended. I just don't know. I don't know if that was intended or what, but
Right.
I mean, it all makes sense in my head except for the fact that I watched F do a terrible job. And if F is going to be the spokesperson, then I don't think Icarus has anything to worry about. I think he could have let him keep broadcasting.
Yeah, that's true.
Because, I mean, my reaction to if I had seen that broadcast, if I just lived in my house and never opened the windows and had no idea what was going on, I just happily played online games every night, had no idea there was this play going on, didn't see anyone getting eaten by vampires, and I saw that broadcast by F, I would think a crazy man is on my television.
That's exactly what I would think too.
Right, and so yeah, but then for it to somehow have roused the vampires is baffling to me. So yeah,
Yes.
that's my thing on that.
Do you want to cover Gus?
Let's
at all?
talk about Gus. Let's get into this. We've danced around it too long.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
you can start.
Okay. So Gus in this episode. So we did talk about Gus in last week's episode to understand my anger about Gus in this episode. Because Gus lost his mother in the last episode. And if there's one thing we know about Gus, and for my money, we only know one thing about Gus, but that one thing is that he loves his mother. That is it. That is our one point of knowledge about Gus. That, and he has good abs, ladies.
Yeah, that's
Um,
yes.
Yeah.
It's a
He
true
loves
fact.
his mother and he has great abs. So he
Yes.
put both of those things to use last week when his mother was murdered and he went on a killing spree. So he's leveraging his muscle to slash the head off the the annoying apartment guy, which is great, awesome. If Gus is gonna be the revenge guy, like if he's gonna be starring in his own revenge movie, sign me up. I'll buy a ticket. Okay, that's a great use of Gus. In this episode, the premise of Gus's story is that he is going to the rob Marlo Stanfield, not the character's name, uh, of some guns and money. So, which is eerily similar to the premise of a previous episode in which he's going to rob a car and sell it to Marlo Stanfield. So, showing no signs of trauma or of the previous sort of state he was in, where he just wanted to kill all the vampires. Gus very sort of matter of factly carjacks Marlowe. Has him drive back to his office. Steals the backpack full of assault rifles that were conveniently located under the desk, and then hears about uh, a container full of something valuable because someone brings in a sack full of money, and decides to rob that container as well. Um, in order to get valuable material so he can sell it for money. So my question is, uh, leaving aside the development at the end of the story, that is, I feel like, and correct me if I'm wrong, that feels like an accurate retelling of the story to that point, is it not?
Um,
What am I wrong about?
See, I guess I just was going with I was just going with the revenge thing that he needed supplies because he's deciding to go on a killing spree and he decides he needs more ammo than just an axe.
Okay.
So like that's my read of it. It's
So,
like he never says that at all. But my reading based on last week's hack and slash that
yeah.
he had was that he was like, you know what's more effective than an
Yeah.
axe? A gun.
So,
And he's like, where do I know where I can get guns?
okay.
The guy who I sell cars to.
So he charged into a horde of zombies, or not horde of zombies, a group of vampires. I think is the proper terminology. Hacked off all their heads with an axe. Then he's like sitting back at his apartment reflecting. You know, he's reflecting on the events of the day, working on some spreadsheets, and he's like, you know what? I it would be it would be more effective on an effort per kill basis if I had an assault rifle. You know, this axe is trusty and loyal, and I can leverage my abs to use it. But if I want to kill real hordes of vampires, I'm gonna need assault weaponry. And so he very measuredly robs Marlo Stanfield. Like he's not. At no point do I think Gus is distraught. I would say during this story, he seems what I'm getting at is the Gus in this episode is the Gus from every episode prior to last week's.
Yes.
In what meaningful way was the Gus character any different now that his beloved mother, the only person that matters in his entire life, his lifeline to the world, his beloved mother, has been brutally murdered in front of him? Or well, he has found her murder. He found her murdered corpse, and she became a vampire. Like pretty lousy way to go. And an event that made Nora, with her terrible mother, like break down and cry like a baby. So Gus, presumably the next day, unaffected by this event, except for his very practical plan to acquire more money and weaponry. Like, I just, I kind of could use
I
a little more, like, I don't know, passion? Like, a little
I
more, like, he wasn't unhinged. Like, he's just behaving. This was the character that we saw in episode 4.
No, but I thought he definitely got unhinged when the vampires showed up from the cargo bay. Like that he
What
no
do you expect him to do? Not
no
shoot them?
no, but like the guy whatever the character's name is.
We're just calling him Marlo. The character's name is
Marlo.
Marlo, as far as I
Yeah.
know.
Right, Marlo from The Wire.
Yes.
So but like he had every opportunity to run with Marlo, and Marlo was trying to get him to run. He was trying not to get him to keep attacking,
Okay.
and instead Gus approaches all of them and keeps shooting
Yes.
with the fervor of somebody who's on a mission.
Fair.
So
So he's like the Incredible Hulk. Like when he sees vampires, he hulks out and becomes
he gets angry, exactly, and that's
Hulk angry.
right.
What-
That was
why-
my read. That was my read. That was
I
my
just-
read.
With all the work, every single scene involving Gus until last week, was to establish how much he loved his mother. And then he loses his mother in the most gruesome way possible.
And does not kill her.
Does not kill her. He is, but he goes on and kills 50 vampires or whatever. Like he goes on a machete style vampire hacking spree. So just I would have liked him to come in a little more hot to this episode. Like he basically pulls a Dexter and hides in the guy's back seat, and then like very calmly assault carjacks him. Like I don't
Yeah,
know.
that was very Dexter. You're right.
Yeah, it's a Dexter. It's a Dexter from the pilot move. Um,
Mm.
I just like nothing. Like there's nothing there until he sees the vampires again. Like he's not. You know what would have been awesome? If he had kicked down the dude's door, shot him in the head, and took his assault rifles. That would have been a move that would have made sense to me, as far as what has happened with Gus in the last week. Like,
Yeah,
I,
I agree, but I think that probably what is going to happen is that Marlowe from the Wire character is going to be influential later, given that he
oh,
lived.
well, fine. Just
Uh,
don't shoot him in the head. Pull the gun on him and take his rifles at gunpoint. Like, don't have
don't
an entire carjacking plan laid out. Like
right.
he thought that plan out. Like and he was so calm and just I don't know, man. Like,
I think you are just bothered by Gus. I genuinely think because I was able to without that because like he's on a very different path than he is in the books. In the books, he's already met the team by this time, but
I wish that would happen. By the way,
I do too. I really need him to join the team.
yeah.
But I'm at the same time just I was totally I know this is no pun intended, but I was totally along for the ride with Gus in this episode. Like I just was like, all right, he just came off of a major killing spree. He needs some better weaponry. He knows where to get better
It's
weaponry. Sees this guy. Oh, dude, I could get money.
He
You know
didn't
what happens with
see
money?
him. No, he
Sure.
didn't see this guy.
Okay,
He
okay.
wasn't walking through the streets and he saw this guy. He thought at home, and then he laid a trap for this guy. Do you know how many hours he must have waited in that back seat? Like he tailed that guy for a day. He broke into his car, waited in the back seat for probably like 6 hours, like while the guy was doing something, and then sprung his trap on him. Like that was a methodical plan for
Yeah.
a guy who just lost
Yeah.
everything he loves in life.
I know, and I misspoke. I meant like he's like, okay, I'm gonna go to this guy where I know I can get the materials that I need, and so
Yeah.
he does. And then when he comes across the vampires, he's like, oh, these are the things that killed my mom. I'm gonna go on a killing spree, even though I should run. And he's gonna do that, and then he gets abducted by the vampire squad.
By the way, he has a bag full of assault weaponry, yet he ends up firing handguns at the,
I know.
the vampires.
I
Come
know.
on, Gus.
They just needed to make him look cool.
God. It, just, like, it was so pragmatic, and far be it from me to criticize a character for being pragmatic, but if I'm going to take the major events of the show seriously, which is something we're about to talk about, because major events happen at the end of this episode that I do not take seriously, but I on record on the podcast saying that I liked Gus last week, and I took the death of his mother seriously. But if I'm going to take it seriously, that needs to have both emotional and storytelling implications for the character. And I guess based on your explanation, I can buy the storytelling implication. The emotional, I do not. Like I
Okay.
need to see that character noticeably different than he was in episode 4, which
I'll,
an
I,
episode that aired 3 months ago. Like I need to see that character have some kind of change because everything he loves was just taken from him. And this is the same Gus that existed in the pilot. It's the same pragmatic Gus, and that's a problem. That's a major problem for me.
do you think that's in the performance or the writing?
The writing. I'm very hesitant to blame the performance on this show of any character because I think the writing is the problem. But I think it was it's just his mother wasn't even mentioned, was she? Did I miss it? Did he
No,
even bring her up this episode?
he did not.
Did he start shooting vampires and go for mama? Like did nothing?
No, but F didn't bring up Kelly at all, and
Well, that's yeah. I don't think that's a. I don't. I don't know if that's a like. Oh, then it's okay moment. I think that that's.
no. I just mean to say that like I think this episode was not a focus on the past; it was a focus on moving towards the future.
Well, it was 25% flashbacks.
That's
So
that's okay. All right, point well made. Point
no,
well
I
made.
get it though. I mean,
Yeah.
it's what and that's fine. I respect that because, like, okay, we're gonna transition the characters into their next phases,
Yes.
and I guess we kind of did that with F. If I'm going to buy your explanation that his speech to the world was intended to be buffoonery, then that makes sense because they're just turning F into a big dummy. So fine. I don't buy it with Gus at all because again, it's the same Gus we've seen for all these episodes.
Right.
So he's doing something that is very similar to what he was doing when he stole the car in the first place and sold it to Marlowe. Like it's a very similar kind of thing where it involves a car and it involves Marlowe and it involves stealing. Like it's pretty. I know the like specific mechanics are different, but it's a pretty similar idea. So
Right.
and he needs money and it's like it just I don't know, man. I just I needed more out of that. Like I needed him to have a little more just something in this episode rather than him to just go right just back to the status quo. Let's make this very practical decision. And then we can talk about how it ended with the Vampire Squad showing up.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Well, with the Vampire Squad or with Palmer?
Well, those two things I want to talk about.
Okay, well, okay. So the Vampire Squad, I just am tapping out. I recognize that I'm gonna have to deal with it next week, like just flat out gonna have to deal with it. But I'm so like that is not the story that I want to be following right now.
Yes.
That
Yep.
is so the antithesis of the story that I want to be following right now. Um, because I just don't feel like the world has come to that point yet. Because that's something that's supposed to be much
Right.
more in the apocalypse, and right now, as we mentioned earlier in the episode, like the world is not ready for there to be a vampire squad. The world is
Sure.
not ready for there to be a secondary group of heroes. Right now, we need the world to fall apart, and we need to
Hmm.
see that world fall apart. We need to see the personal lives of our characters fall apart, and then we need to
Yeah.
bring in the extra help.
Yes.
Uh,
But
so
and that all makes sense to me. But that is also based on your hashtag book reader knowledge. Um, like for me, like obviously I had no idea that this kind of element was going to be introduced at all, and it was very exciting when they were introduced the first time because it's like, hey, cool, something's happening.
right, I'm so anti it, and you're so pro it.
But that's
Like,
but that's makes sense because
yeah,
you are wanting the show to follow the book structure. I suspect you
I
would have a similar opinion if you did not know what happens, right? I mean, it's hard to make a hypothetical like that, but I feel like your opinion is largely informed by the complete knowledge you have because you know the timeline. For me, the timeline
yeah,
is just unfolding as each
ex-
episode plays
exactly.
out.
I think that I'm not having the problem with them being in it. I'm not even really having a problem with them being early. I'm just having the problem with the world not being in the apocalypse
Sure.
when they show up because like that just feels to me like a very important factor.
Yeah.
Like
Well, and
it feels
people in New York don't even know the apocalypse is happening.
right.
So
People in New
that's
York
the
are
problem.
just like, oh, everybody has the flu. And like,
Yeah.
so we should not be dealing with we should not be dealing with any other like um extra material, because that is extra material at this point, in my
Sure.
opinion, until like the world and until the city has accepted that it's under siege.
Sure.
Like,
Yeah.
and this just keeps going back to the things that we kept talking about earlier in our podcasts, and then I, eventually gave up on saying it. Is like, I kept saying it's gonna happen, it's gonna happen, it's
Yeah.
gonna happen, and it's just like
Hasn't happened.
it really hasn't never happened, and like it should have happened, and it
Yeah.
should have happened like 6 episodes ago,
Yeah.
and I that is the only like the other book stuff I can totally get over. Like even Dutch, I'll probably adjust and get used to her. And like, I mean, I don't like the sexy like we're just gonna make a sexy woman and make her an whatever like
Yeah.
thing. But like all the other changes that they've made, I think a lot of them have actually told the story better, and they're good. For me, they're supplementary for what I have from the books. And so I can totally accept changes, and I'm not a stickler for that stuff. I'm not like your traditional Game of Thrones reader. I'm sorry, but
No.
like I am totally okay with the changes. I just need the apocalypse to happen.
Yes.
That's all. That's where I'm at right now. Is that
Yeah.
I just need to be in an apocalypse world,
Yes.
and I'm not there, and it makes me sad.
Sure.
So
That is a view I totally understand, even as a
yeah,
non-book reader.
yeah,
And that I've been calling for. I mean, we both called for like back in episode 4. Like
yes,
it's been a while now.
yeah,
Um, Here's my problem with that scene. Because on Twitter everyone's like, "Oh, the Vampire Squad's back," and it's like, yeah, it's cool, but that's all it is. It's just
hmm
cool. It's cool for the sake of being cool. In that we didn't. They just show up out of the blue, and there was no build up to it. There was no setup. There was no anything. It's just a moment where some writer decided, oh, let's have this happen. Okay, let's do. Like there was no.
Yeah.
There's when you contrast that as well as the stuff with Palmer that we'll talk about in a second to um the the episodic material here with Abe and Nora, the way that we were praising that story for how complexly it linked those two stories and how it had linked those two stories on both a physical and emotional level, where they both had to kill their loved ones um, in order to detach themselves from the past. Like that's the kind of like build up storytelling that I think the strain misses most of the time, and
Yeah.
and this is just a perfect example of that where we had no. I mean, it's like, oh, surprise, Vampire Squad's here. Okay, they took
Yeah.
us. 2 minutes later, we're done.
Yeah. That might really be my beef with the Vampire Squad as a whole right now. Like, not just now that you say that, not just the fact that like I need them in a different context, but like that every time that they've shown up, it's just been like, oh, that's really cool. Like,
Yes. Well,
it's
they
like
showed up twice.
great, but the two times that they've shown up completely out of context of themselves and with no explanation. They're just like, bam, we're here, we're in ninja outfits, and we're gonna
Yeah.
take down the danger. Cool, and now we're gonna leave. Like
Yes.
that's
Right.
that's how they function, and it's not for everybody else. It's like, oh, look at them, they're so creepy looking. Like to me, it's like it's just dumb. This is
Yeah.
dumb. There's other material to be working with right now. This is dumb.
Well, and the first time they showed up, I assumed, like any right-minded TV viewer, that they would become a feature of the show. That, okay, we have introduced this group, they came out of the blue, they are clearly different than any characters we have. They are now going to be a B story in a bunch of episodes because that's how television works. At least
Right.
effective television, where you introduce a character and then you get to know that character. And so I was excited about that possibility. Instead, they have been utterly absent from the show for 6 episodes now, and then they pop up and do the exact same thing basically. And
Yes.
that's not an effective use of those characters.
No.
That's nothing. That's empty fireworks. It's just having a big finish to say that you had a big finish, but it's hollow, which is the word
Yeah.
I used in the title of my review. That I felt like the developments at the end of this episode were hollow because I mean, they just it could have happened any time. It's just there was no setup. It's like, oh, here, big event. It's the penultimate episode. Everyone freak out,
Yep.
and it's just that frustrates me, which brings me into the talk about Palmer,
Yes.
where it's just like, what's that story is so straightforward. The Palmer story, like, what's the twist with Palmer's story that's happened so far? I'm sure down the road there'll be stuff, but like, 12 episodes are done now. The story is played out exactly how you would have expected to play out from the moment Palmer went on screen.
Yeah.
There's no turns, there's no twists. He was the bad guy who funded this whole thing. We knew he was dying right from the get-go. This episode he is on his deathbed, and then the master comes and gives him the quote-unquote gift, which we all assumed was happening because it was a sort of condition of him bringing the master back. Like there was no drama, there was no element of surprise. It's just straightforward. Every appearance of every episode has been one after the other. His plan has went off flawlessly with zero snags, and here we are. Like it's like there's just nothing. It's
Yeah.
just dead straight.
Yeah. No, I could not have possibly said it better. Like it the Palmer thing is gonna be whatever it is. They have chosen to go this very straightforward route. But then you didn't watch the preview for next week, and they did indicate some things are going to go wrong in the preview for next
Good.
week. That
Well,
it is not what Palmer expected.
it only took
So
12 episodes
yeah,
to make that character have. I mean, 12 episodes now. I defy you or any listener to tell me one even moderately interesting thing that has happened with Palmer. Just one. I want one thing with him that is interesting in any substantial way.
no, there's nothing.
Nothing.
He's the most. It's the most straightforward plot you're gonna get out of the string. Um, that being said, next week's events look pretty cool.
I hope so. It's
So
the finale.
It is, yeah. It's the finale. It better do the thing it doesn't like again. Like that's the one. Okay, my two requirements from this show as being a book reader. My
Yes.
two requirements. Everything else I can get over or I can like deal with. Like even if they killed characters who don't die in the books or whatever, I could get over it. So my two requirements are the apocalypse just needs to happen.
Sure.
like
Cosign.
Right. Just need to be there. And then the thing that happened in the book that kept me awake for 3 days, and I've said that on every podcast for the last 7
It
podcasts,
has happened.
the thing that kept me awake for 3 days, the thing that made me go, you know what, this is good.
Hmm.
That moment needs to happen. And then I'll be satisfied.
Okay.
So, but of course, we'll be able to talk about that in next week's postmortem.
Yes. Here's what needs to happen for me, having no knowledge. Um, I need the episode to not feel pointless for 30 minutes, as many of these episodes, including tonight's, have. Um, I would really like the gang to immediately have something to do. That would be nice. Not just sitting around waiting for Dutch Velders to work the internet cable. Like that'd be great. While Vass flirts with her. Like that's what I don't need. I need urgency. A word that I
Yeah.
use a lot, and I feel like is the key word for the strain. Is that this was a desperately non-urgent episode.
Yes.
Desperately. There was
Absolutely.
nothing urgent about this episode until Gus opened the container with vampires in it. Like,
Yeah.
this was painfully lax. And, which is so ridiculous because it's the penultimate episode of the season. Like, stuff should be happening.
Yeah.
So again, like that's my main complaint. That, you know what? I'll sum it up in one word. I want urgency in this finale. That's what I want. I want it to be an urgent episode where something needs to be done and our people need to get it done. That's all I want.
I can get behind that. And if the events from the book occur next week, then you will get your urgency.
Yeah, it ties together. I think we want the same thing. I just don't know what specifically it is I want.
Exactly.
So, hopefully, we'll be rooting for that to happen.
So I think ultimately, the beginning of this podcast, we were saying we were going to disagree so much. I don't think that we did.
Just on Gus. I think you like the character. I think fundamentally, and you said this, you like the character and I don't.
Yeah.
That doesn't mean I like the character last week. I would like Gus if I felt like he was being given interesting things to do, and I suspect that as soon as he joins the team, which at this pace will happen in like season 4, I will start liking him almost immediately because he will be juxtaposed with F, who I hate. So,
Yes.
so I call it the Vass effect. Because yeah, I think that a similar thing will happen with that character when the show deigns to have him meet the main crew. So yeah, I mean, I don't have anything against Gus. I just think he is being deployed in a way that is non-optimal. And so I hope that I want to like him. I want to be like everyone on Twitter and like him. I just need the show to step it up a bit with him.
Yeah, you can't the abs don't put like a glamour
They're not
on.
helping. They're not
No,
helping.
they don't help you.
Uh,
Oh, I will mention that it was men and women who said that they loved Gus.
no,
So
well, I'm being facetious when I say that women love him for the.
I know.
But
I know.
I think in general, what it is book readers love Gus.
Yes.
I think that is a character that maybe connects a lot better with people who have read the series than the show has done portraying him. Like I feel like everyone who's yelling about Gus are people who have read the books.
I think that's very fair. That's very, very fair. All right. Well, before we wrap up, did we have any fan letters this week?
We did. We got a follow-up mail from one of our favorite fans whose name I did not write down, so I'm gonna look it up really fast. But basically, agreeing with our assessment of last week's episode, saying that it was one of the better ones of the series, which you and I both agreed upon.
Mm-hmm.
And noting that something that I'm going to say in a second when I pull up the email. He enjoyed our talk on whether it was a coffin or a cabinet. Honestly, might be our best podcast moment. That was a real classic moment. And also wondering about the location of Dutch Velders, which sadly was answered this episode. and he complimented the lighting of that episode.
Oh,
But this is Mark, our friend Mark. Shout out to Mark.
yes.
Um, he complimented the lighting of that episode, which is something I wanted to bring up very quickly before we wrap up, which is that I was very unimpressed visually by this episode.
Huh.
I thought this was the most drab episode. I thought the flashbacks in particular were very bad, and not just
The
um,
makeup.
because as I said on Twitter, middle-aged Abe looked like like a railroad villain. Like he's like a 1850s like like Boris and Natasha style mustache twirling supervillain. Like he looked terrible.
He looks bad.
He looked. It was a horrible like facial hair and makeup combination.
Yeah, it was
Um,
terrible.
it
It
was
was pretty
terrible.
bad.
But the whole episode was drab, and maybe that's just because no one had anything to do. But there was just nothing. Last week we went out of our way to praise the way that the vampire crawled through the tunnel.
Hmm.
Tell me one thing like that happened here, like one like sort of Guillermo del Toro-y twist where like something is physically cool.
The vampire that Abe met when he went through the tunnel and it was speaking with the master's voice,
That
and
was
it was
good.
a
You're right. One.
yeah.
You got one. You got one.
Yeah.
You beat
Yeah.
the challenge.
And Bolivar was terrifying when he showed up. Which, and apropos of nothing,
That's right.
Bolivar,
That's right.
Gabriel Bolivar is relevant again.
Yeah.
We have not seen him since episode 3.
Could we have just
Uh,
traded him for Dutch? Could we
I
just have him back and
just,
leave Dutch out with the vampires? Would that
I
have
know.
been too much to ask?
I know. I don't understand. I don't understand the point of watching Gabe. I do not understand the point of watching him transform and do all of this work for him, and then just to utilize him just as the killer of Mrs. Martinez. Like there. If he's going to be the only one of the 4 to remain alive, then he needs to be relevant in his own way,
Mm-hmm.
and he just hasn't been. Like he just
No.
became like he just is dressed in his goth makeup, and it makes him scary. And like,
Mhm.
but yeah. So I thought he was pretty visually interesting. I thought Gus fighting all the vampires was pretty visually interesting. I thought Eichhorst with his gang of vampires that all look the same. Also,
Mm.
they were
None-
there. They
None of
just,
that did it for me.
yeah,
That was like 0 for 5 for me.
yeah. But I do agree though that it was the least visually stimulating episode of all of the episodes of The Strain, which again is a tragedy given that it is the penultimate episode.
Was anything, I'm not gonna say scary, but was anything suspenseful about this episode? Like the way that, like, for example, last week, the vampire crawling through the tunnel, like that was both scary and suspenseful. Like, was anything suspenseful this week? Like, did we really think Eichhorst was gonna like break in while the crew was still in the pawn shop and butcher all of them? Like, was that happening? I know, because it's a TV show that's gonna go on for multiple seasons.
No, I think the only element of suspense that's there for me is book stuff. Like, yeah, I don't think that there's anything there as a TV show on its own.
I guess the one scary moment was Gabe killing Nora's mom when they walked up the stairs and he was killing her.
Yeah, and that was pretty gross.
That was pretty gross. Yeah, that was good. Yeah, I just in general. I mean, maybe it was just the flashbacks I thought were really boring.
Yeah.
In terms of visual style, I thought they were content-wise fine, whatever.
But you would think that it's so funny we're not bringing it up. Like Abe gutted his wife
Yeah,
to take her heart out,
he did.
and that did nothing for me.
No, not at all. It was so like soft focus almost like that's not the right word because I'm not a director, but like it was like in front of a fireplace.
Yeah.
It was-
Okay. We watch Hannibal.
Yeah,
Okay, and Hannibal's on NBC.
yeah.
FX gets away with a lot more than Hannibal.
No.
And I have seen way grosser stuff on Hannibal than seeing Abe pull the heart out of his dead wife. The still beating heart out of his dead wife.
That scene needed to be not as tender. I wanted that scene to be visceral. Like I wanted like after because he had sat all day with his dead wife. I guess like I don't know. I wanted him to like be out in like the snow or whatever, like just like screaming like Nora did when she chopped off her mother's head, and like tear the heart out, like like a real like moment. But it was like a romantic candlelit, heart wrenching, literal heart wrenching, not figurative.
Yes.
In the way you used it to start this episode.
Well, I thought I'd try. Yeah, but so I think that was meant to be the visual moment, but it just wasn't.
Didn't happen.
It didn't work. No.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay. Well, per usual, before we go, I want to give my quick Shout out to the Masters Minions. They are a very cool fan group. You can find them on Facebook and on Twitter. And I also think that you should totally write your own reviews on showratings.tv, but I'm sure that Kyle has more to say about that.
Yeah, shout out to showratings.tv, the website that Blair and I are editors for. You can type The Strain into the search bar at the top. It'll pop up with the most recent episode. Write your review. Comment on my review. It's up. It's up right there. You don't even have to click the link that I tweeted out. You can find it right on the episode page and add a comment and add your own review and give it a better rating than I did.
Give it a better rating than he did. Do it.
Yeah, bump the rating up. Yeah, so go to showratings.tv and check it out.
All right. Well, this wraps up our 13th episode of the Strain podcast. Before we go, I want to mention a few things. You can download and subscribe to our podcasts on iTunes, Stitcher, and SoundCloud. You can also hear all of our podcasts at our website, southgatemediagroup.com. Please subscribe to this show and also rate us. Follow the show on Twitter at @TheStrainPod and Kyle and I at @KyleLovesTV and @BlairLovesTV. Remember, Kyle and Blair both have an E at the end. Check out our website, showratings.tv, to rate and review The Strain every week, as well as all of your other favorite shows. Thank you again for tuning in, and we'll see you next week.
If you would like to donate to help pay for this and other Southgate Media Group podcasts, simply go to our website, southgatemediagroup.com, and click on the donate button. It can be as little as $1 or, well, as much as you want. Help keep this fun going by supporting this and our other shows. Thanks again for listening, everyone. You're the best fans in the world.